Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pets, People, Life, and Longevity. I am Jan Jeremias, and I'm here with my canine companion, Tonka. A little bit more about me. I'm a trained scientist who began exploring holistic and alternative healing about 18 years ago. And I began my journey with the use of essential oils and began exploring things like Reiki, gentle massage, and other modalities for pets and people. I am the co-author of the top-selling book on essential oils for pets called Spoil Your Pet, a practical guide to using essential oils in dogs and cats. And today I'm excited to welcome my guest, Dr. Gerald Buchoff, who actually used to be my vet, and then I moved. So now he's a little far, but welcome. So glad you're here.
Well, we're building a new practice. I should have made it in your neighborhood, huh?
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, oh, shoot, a little bit too far. But just to give you an idea, Dr. Buchoff is the now owner of Holistic Pet Care, but soon to be one of the largest holistic pet care facility in the country. And so that's super exciting, which is going to be where's it going to be located?
In Whippany, New Jersey, near Morristown, the center of New Jersey.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, kind of.
Really interesting. And practices a number of holistic modalities, from chiropractic to Chinese medicine, acupuncture and herbs, other herbal medicine, essential oils, fecal microbiome transplantation, which I want to talk about today, biophotonic blood treatments, ozone treatments, intravenous vitamin C, and just to name, and then there's more. So there's still more. And so just a few questions I have for you, since actually some information that I don't need to know. Did you always practice holistic veterinary medicine?
Well, I think I did, but not formally. So I graduated from veterinary school in 1980, and I went to a veterinary school in India, where yes, they had modern ways of treating in a way when the materials were available. You know, they had the Western medicines, they had X-ray machine and things like that. But sometimes we ran out of supplies and we couldn't do lab testing, blood testing. And you had to learn a lot of intuitive treating, intuitive medicine in a sense, but not intuitive in the way of somebody who can read an animal. But, you had to use your own feeling about a case. So in a little way, I did holistic medicine from the start, but it wasn't until 1995 that I really delved in formally, took courses in homeopathy, took courses in herbology and acupuncture and chiropractic, etc. And, then I was a holistic veterinarian. But up until then, I was doing many more vaccines, many more surgeries that now I look back at and I realize they could have been supplanted by chiropractic adjustments, such as knee, ruptured anterior cruciate ligaments in the knee. I used to do 2 surgeries a week practically, and now I do maybe 1 or 2 a year because it's really not necessary.
That's amazing. I'm thinking my cousin, whose dog just had, she was just told that her dog has to have ACL, and I'm like, maybe I should call her.
Let me jump in there a little, because we're finding that we can prevent ruptured anterior cruciate ligament cases a lot. And what we found is that by not removing the hormones from an animal, not doing a full spay, but only taking out the uterus, leaving the ovaries, and not doing a full castration, in other words, doing a vasectomy, so you leave the testicles in place, you will greatly reduce the chances of ruptured ligaments of any sort. So apparently, not having the proper level of hormones, you do sacrifice the strength of the ligaments and tendons and connective tissue in general.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That, to me, that's like super, super
Yeah,
interesting.
and your listeners should get their veterinarians to learn about OSS, that's ovary sparing spays, otherwise known as hysterectomies, and partial castrations, better known as vasectomy. And I wish everybody would do it. Unfortunately, I'm one of the very few vets in New Jersey that does it, and people come from very far for it.
Wow, it's so interesting. And it makes so much sense to me. I mean, my background being science, I just, worked in OBGYN for 20 years. So I was dealing with humans, but that whole language seems to make so much sense. And, on a scientific level and on an anatomical level, I mean, I would think that for ruptures of ligaments and stuff, like weight would play a huge factor.
It's true that, and which is kind of ironic, because when you spay or castrate an animal and remove their hormones, you also decrease their metabolism and decrease their spirit, and they tend to get fatter because of the lack of exercise. Another thing I didn't mention, the main reason that people do the ovary sparing spay and vasectomy instead is that it decreases the chances of cancer a lot. So by removing the hormones, you actually encourage cancer.
Sure.
Especially osteosarcomas and hemangiosarcomas, and some of the things that we're seeing so much of these days.
Right. Wow. And so maybe since we hit on weight a little bit, that's one of my pet peeves, is overweight pets. I like talk to people all day. That's probably the biggest question I get, is like, or comment about their people's pets being overweight. So I know that you are a huge advocate of raw food, and I figured of feeding raw. And so I figured maybe you could share with our listeners some of the information that you'd like to share about eating a raw diet and why people should feed raw versus feed other things.
Well, I don't know. From my point of view, not feeding raw diet is just silly. It really is. It's so unnatural for an animal to eat a food that's cooked. And when you do cook the food, you destroy a lot of its essence. You just go up to 105 degrees, which is hardly cooking, and you're already losing the digestive or the food enzymes that are part of the digestion. You go up to, let's say, 120 degrees, you're now losing the bacteria. And there's a lot of good bacteria that are part of the food that are really important to the animal. In fact, this whole worry about salmonella and listeriosis and E. coli 0157, those are really related to people's needs. So the animals do not get those very easily at all. I joke that you could probably add salmonella to your pet's food and they'll do fine. Don't do that. Don't try this at home.
Right.
But seriously, it's they're really related to the people that are going to handle the food. That's why they regulate the food. It's not like the federal government is really worried about your puppy getting listeriosis or something like that. So and then you go up to, let's say, 160 degrees, or maybe even a little less. And now you're losing your omega-3 fatty acids, which are quite important, very important as anti-inflammatory.
Right.
Yeah. And then you do what they do in canned food and kibble. You go up to, 200s and even up to 300 and hold it there for a while, for a long time. And now you're not just destroying a lot more vitamins and a lot of the really the life of the food, but you're also producing heterocyclic amines, and those actually are cancer-causing chemicals that are formed in the food. So by feeding kibble and hot, heated canned food, which of course they all are, you're actually encouraging the chances of cancer. So, it's just not smart. So go back the other direction. Oh, and by the way, any of these foods that are kibble or canned food, or even other foods like partially cooked, they probably have a lot of chemicals in them,
Mm-hmm.
which add to the insult. So preservatives, a lot of preservatives are known to be carcinogens, or at least are not antioxidants, but the opposite. They actually increase free radicals, or let's say artificial colorings, artificial flavorings. These things are, unreal. And then you add to all of that what the starting ingredients are. And a lot of dog food companies, especially the big ones, are very focused on profit and have a lot of starch, grains that are very unnatural for pets. And if I may, Purina did a big disservice by talking to the public about grain-free diets being a catastrophe. And indeed they are, but that doesn't mean that grain is needed. Okay, so that was the inference that was a falsehood, that pets should not have grain. In fact, this whole thing arose from the idea of, people knew that they were adding a lot of grain to the food, and grain is, number one, pretty allergenic to a lot of pets.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, it's very inflammatory to the system, especially of pets. And so the public, cried out and said, we don't want grain. So these foods came out, these pet food manufacturers came out with grain-free diets. Okay, that was a genre of food, grain-free diets. And instead of the grain, they replaced it with worse things like potatoes and rice and tapioca, and things that just are very starchy, maybe more so than the grain. And they were missing two really essential amino acids, one called methionine, another cysteine. And the body of dogs combines those two amino acids and produces taurine.
Mm-hmm.
Well, number one, a good food has a lot of taurine already in it because there's so much meat, and healthy meat that hasn't been destroyed by heat. And by and of course would also have methionine and cysteine in it from other ingredients. So there's no excuse for replacing grains with worse materials that lead. And by the way, all this leads to a disease called cardiomyopathy.
Mm-hmm.
Right, if you don't have enough taurine. This was found out in cats way back in the 80s or 90s or whatever. So yeah, that's a real bad misconception. The clients, even veterinarians, come to me and said, aren't you supposed to make sure your pet eats grains for their heart? No. That's a very bad misconception.
Yeah, I know from the human world. I think that, basically it's carbohydrates, and carbohydrates, at least grain carbohydrates or whatever, create sugar like in the body, which is never which cause inflammation, which isn't a good idea. Is it different for, I do know the original work that was done on taurine in cats, because that was, I remember when I first started making my own raw cat food, and that was the big thing, is make sure it has enough taurine, but is it very different for cats and dogs? Just because I know their anatomy is so different, and cats are cats and dogs are dogs, but basically when you're feeding raw, do they both do as well? And do you find?
No, they both. See, cats can't make their own taurine. That's a problem. So you have to supply it in the diet as full taurine, not just as two amino acids that the body can combine. It's interesting because a fellow who discovered this, Dr. Paul Payan, he worked for me on Saturdays when he discovered all this back in the 1990s.
That is cool. That is cool. And I used to add taurine, actually. I used to add a supplement that contained taurine because I was told that, but that is really interesting. One of the things I did want to talk about, because I really am very interested in this myself, and that's the fecal microbiome transplantation and what it is exactly and when do you use it?
What it is your, I guess I should step back. There's a general premise that your listeners would benefit from knowing. I think it's true in humans and in animals that only 20% of the stimulation or the influence on your body to be healthy or to be unhealthy comes from your genetics. And the other 80% comes from the environment. Now, the environment can be what's around you, but actually most of the environment is what is inside the gut, the microbiome, not only the types of bacteria, but, and by the way, there's about 1,000 subspecies of bacteria that are important in our pets, 1,000 and 500 full species. We talk about only Lactobacillus acidophilus and Bifidobacterium. No, that's just 2 of them, and they're major and they're very important, but that's not the whole picture. So anyway, it's the type of bacteria, the balance of those bacteria, the richness of those bacteria that are extremely important. And if you don't have the right bacteria and balance and all that, the body is unbalanced and allows the immune system to work to malfunction, and allows a lot of other things to malfunction, the hormones, etc. And it turns out it's a lot more than that. So not only do cancer patients do better if you give them better bacteria, but even dogs or cats that are misbehaving, that are unusually aggressive, that have won't stand up for themselves, that in either direction, the emotions being in correct balance, by changing the bacteria in the intestines and bringing the bacteria from a healthy animal that has a well-balanced body, well-balanced health, well-balanced emotions, you can improve the recipient's health and emotional health. Isn't that incredible?
It is incredible. And I'm thinking about, I wonder if you could do that in humans.
And that's where we learned it. That's where we learned it. In fact, they're using it in autistic children or autistic adults, and there is some improvement from that. But of course, there's a lot of physiological changes that can't be reversed, but a lot of changes can be, a lot of things can be reversed. And so we use it. So what it is we do an enema. Let's say a dog or a cat will do an enema and clear out the poop from the colon, from the large intestine. And then we will take ozone and infuse or insufflate the intestines. So we'll fill them with the ozone gas. And the ozone kills bacteria pretty readily. In fact, they even use ozone to sterilize sewage, believe it or not. So anyway, you do that and let the animal void, go to the bathroom. And then we actually take the slurry of stool from a very healthy dog or cat and put it into the dog or cat. We don't put cat poop in dogs or dog poop in cats. No.
Got it.
And then it plants itself. It takes residence there and changes the animal's microbiome. And we'll do it not just once, but usually 2 or even 3 times. It could be done more than that in some cases. But and you asked where do we use it? We use it in cases of cancer or any chronic diseases that just won't move. Or you could really use it in, I think the future is going to be where we do fecal transplants every single year in order to prevent problems, in order to keep the body well balanced. This, I think, is my next step in helping my pets, my thousands of pets that I feel that I'm a major caretaker for, to stay healthy. And it's that and good food and chiropractic adjustments every 6 months. That's my 3 pillars of health, to really try to prevent serious disease, cancer, autoimmune disease, and to some extent degenerative disease. I mean, you can't keep a dog from getting older, the years pass, but for them to get older slower would be wonderful. And I think we can do it.
That's amazing, because I think that's what it is it's not, they're going to get old, but can we optimize their well-being while they're here,
We want them to grow old gracefully.
Exactly. I love all that. Do you use the I'm assuming you must use it in a lot of gut issues. I'm thinking from my personal experience for the microbiome.
Yeah, that's so obvious. I didn't even mention it
today. Yeah.
Inflammatory bowel disease.
Yeah. Speaking from close to home. So, but what I find interesting is the articles that I've read about animal and caretaker, so human or whatever you want to call the person who cares for that, and having similar microbiomes. And when I first read that, it made so much sense to me. But it's kind of interesting that they say they influence each other. And that's probably purely environmental, water, like, food, but I thought, see, science, just every now and then science catches up. And I think that, all the people who said to me, I have the same issue as my pet, is that coincidental, years ago. And now I'm thinking to myself, not so coincidental, probably very true. What do you think, so for first, though, that would be the good 3 pillars for first-time pet people. But now I know there are a lot of first-time pet people these days with COVID. So many people got pets. And what would you say, would there be anything else you would share with people who are having a pet for the first time and don't really have much experience with that?
Well, there's so much you can do every day. Most important is love. That is above everything else. You love your pet, you give them, personal attention, and everything else should come out of that. So walking them, giving them exercise, or if it's a pet that's indoors only, like a cat, giving them laser to chase, or some other game, to also brush them every day with a slicker brush, generally a gentle slicker brush. They have the bent wires, or if it's a German Shepherd type of coat, a regular slicker brush, to brush the teeth every day. So if it's a very small puppy that hasn't developed any tartar whatsoever, it's a toothpaste that has enzymes. But if they're already developing tartar, then you go with a tooth gel, generally, that has grapefruit seed extract and grape seed extract. And that should help to break down the tartar. So that also thumping the thymus. So right between our armpits is where we generally thump our thymus. Okay. With a dog or cat, it's basically the same thing between their armpits. So when they're standing, just directly underneath, not high up, but directly underneath, because under that sternum is the thymus gland that you're trying to stimulate. And the thymus gland can not only strengthen immunity, but more importantly, modify it so it works for the pet rather than against it as an autoimmune disease like allergies and arthritis and many other autoimmune situations where the body attacks itself.
I love that. It gives me something that I can do with Tonka now. They never did thymus tapping.
And the other thing that I would tell a first-time owner is to get the advice of a holistic vet, because I think they are a little bit more worldly and more open and have learned more. You get a lot of misinformation from breeders. They'll tell people with little puppies to feed them twice a day, which is terribly unbiological. Up until 12 weeks old, they should feed them 4 times a day. And then up until 6 months old, 3 times a day, and then twice a day after 6 months old. I would also say it's really important to avoid chemicals as much as possible. There are so many chemicals out there that are people have them foisted on their pets. Flea and tick medications. You and I are very much in concert with knowing that there's a good alternative to that, and that would be essential oils. There's so many essential oils that repel fleas, ticks, mosquitoes, and flies. And it's just not necessary to give things that kill mosquitoes and ticks and flies. You want to just keep them away from your pet. However, in the cases where you do have an infestation of fleas, I do advocate using those poisons on a very limited basis. So using it once, it should take care of the whole month. Don't repeat it next month, because it's when you repeat things that you get toxicity reactions and hurt the liver so much. We also advocate limiting vaccines. So the rabies vaccine we'll give at 6 months old, cats and dogs. We'll give it again a year later. And then every 3rd year after that, we recommend taking a blood test. It's called a vaccine titer. So there's rabies vaccine titer, and there's distemper and parvo vaccine titer. So in the case of distemper and parvo for dogs and just distemper for cats, we recommend giving this series to a kitten or a puppy. I like only giving 2, like at 9 weeks old and perhaps 14 weeks old for the distemper and parvo to a dog, and then a puppy gets it at 18 weeks old. And with cats, they only need a couple vaccines, like at 8 weeks old and maybe 15. And that's very biologically set to work with the mother's antibodies, because if you do vaccines too early, the mother's antibodies from when she was nursing them interferes with the vaccine working properly. So again, the puppy or kitten vaccines, and then the following year and every 3rd year after that, do the vaccinal titers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I can say I've always done titers. We were on the same boat for that. And it's always amazing to me how, like, for me, how a few vaccines Tonka's had to have, because his titers have always been high. So, I love that. I think that we're going to definitely have you back. This was great information, and I appreciate.
We went through a half hour.
Yeah, we went through a half an hour. And
all right, so many things to talk about today.
Okay. Well, we can slice this out. What are you dying to share?
I'm dying to share how much chiropractic can save people so much money and can save lives so much. This is the first modality of holistic medicine I learned, and that was in 1997. And I've done thousands and thousands of adjustments, probably tens of thousands, I'm sure. And they can prevent chronic disease. Dr. William Inman, out in Idaho, at that time he was in Washington State, he was the one who developed that. And I always want to shout out to him, because he really deserves a lot of credit for improving the health of many millions of pets. So the point is that by adjusting the spine, you're actually opening up the nerve switches along the spine, which any chiropractic treatment will do, and allows the body to communicate better. In other words, the nerve impulses get to where they need to get, as opposed to being blocked. And so by the body being able to communicate so much better, it functions better, and pets live. This was a study he did from the 60s through the 70s with, I think, about 16,000 dogs in this case. Pets live, or dogs live, 28.5% longer just by giving chiropractic adjustments. And we were on the Today Show a few months ago, and I mentioned there that in my practice, compared to when I was conventional, my practice now, pets live 40% longer. I since learned that it's actually 41% by looking at my data, but and that's because the chiropractic plus the raw food, plus just preventing a lot of things, that veterinarians do that decrease the lifespan. Yeah, it's just incredible. And chiropractic should be given every 6 months in my, by my belief. And you have a certain, you have a series that builds up to that. It takes about 6 months, and then do it once every 6 months.
Oh, okay. Okay. So they're doing a certain number, and then they get to 6 months, and then kind of like, then they can get a tune up every 6 months after that.
Exactly. Because the body can hold that adjustment only that long, because the spine is elastic.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things. Chinese herbs and acupuncture are so beneficial in unblocking energy that is trying to get through, that is trying to be normal. Even it's very interesting in the Chinese system of medicine. They've realized that so much that happens in the body is due to the energy not moving properly. You get blockages, and in that, those meridians in the body that where the energy travels, there's, when you get a tumor or a cyst or any kind of growth, it's usually on the meridian. In fact, probably always is on the meridian. And those are due to that meridian becoming unbalanced. And then the body tries to balance it, or tries to prevent more imbalance by localizing that imbalance. So let's say you have the liver meridian, and the body wants to localize that that imbalance, not let the whole meridian be unbalanced. I guess you could say the body produces a growth there. Now that growth could be allowing the papilloma virus to produce a wart there, or it could mean a cyst being produced, like a sebaceous gland cyst, or a tumor, God forbid, growing on that spot. And those are the body's way of localizing an imbalance. So I find that fascinating.
Yeah. So if you do acupuncture in a situation like that, does the growth actually go away, or does it just prevent further damage to that area?
Both can happen. Most of us, including me, don't have the patience to wait and see, because it's too worrisome. So I will remove the growth, but then I'll do the acupuncture and usually the chiropractic to rebalance the meridians and keep things from getting unbalanced again as much as possible. Yeah. So that's really important.
So I would think, though, that, let's say, I mean, to me, every, many beings, including animals, us, we have sort of tendencies toward an imbalance a lot of the time. So, once it happens in one area, you're trying to maintain balance all the time, but is it common that that area will be afflicted again?
Yes and no. And I go back to what we talked about in the last segment, and that was the microbiome imbalance. And very often with that, whatever that imbalance imbalanced microbiome is, it speaks to a certain area of the body constantly being weak and being afflicted and having tumors return to that area, or other problems happen with that animal or that system, or the tendons in general, or whatever it is, arthritis. So yeah, I think if you change the microbiome, give a healthy new microbiome from another animal, you probably will change that pattern of a certain area of the body being weak.
So interesting. So for our listeners, if they wanted to find someone who was doing this kind of work, who doesn't live in, who's not like, they're not in New Jersey, what would you think would be the best way for them to find out that information?
They get in an airplane and come to me.
Or they get in a car like me and they drive. No.
Well, we do get people, even though we're in New Jersey, we do get people from Massachusetts and Florida, not Florida, Maryland on a regular basis. And there are clients who used to live in New Jersey and they now live in Florida, and they time their visit with their family for when they can bring their pet up to see me. So that happens too. And we actually have a patient in this morning from California. She's traveling cross country, but the regular, we are, on a highway and available to everybody. But yes, if you want to find a local holistic veterinarian, you look at ahvma.org. That's the American Holistic Veterinary Medical Association. And you can find there is a veterinary directory there.
That's great. Now, just I think my last question, because all of a sudden I thought of it and I was just curious. Is it very different outside of this country? Are they, I know a lot of alternative or holistic modalities sometimes are much more accepted or much more like you might almost call mainstream in other parts of the world. And I wonder if that's true with some of the things you're talking about.
The acceptance.
Yeah.
So let's say in Germany, somebody would say, well, of course you use homeopathy before you use chemicals. That's my philosophy, but there's, generally people don't think that way. So they think of it as last ditch effort, you take out the alternative medications. But in certain countries, people are just used to using it for themselves. And we do have veterinarians from all over the world in the American Holistic Veterinary Medical Association that I used to be president of. And I've very rarely missed a conference of theirs. We literally have every year. And in fact, the next one is in a couple weeks.
September, I think. Yeah.
September 10th, I think. And always looking forward to that, because I see the giants in veterinary medicine like Gene Dodds and Richard Pitcairn and Ihor Basco and so many others. I'm going to leave out about 50. But there's holistic veterinarians in foreign countries that do things a little differently. There's a Dr. Sagiv Ben, I'm sorry, I'm messing up his name. Yakir Ben Sagiv, and he's in Israel, and he uses leeches to treat saddle thrombus in a cat, which causes their back legs to become paralyzed and have no blood. And also he uses bee venom therapy. And so he's been teaching us Americans some good holistic medicine that we don't otherwise know about. And the Japanese teach us other things. And, everybody from different countries has something to offer that is different.
Right. And that's such a gift, is the fact that then together, hopefully you make even more change. And, you advance forward so much more gracefully, as you said earlier.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great. and I do appreciate you getting on. And I can't wait to have you back, because you can come back with some new items that you're going to learn or you're going to hear about at the conference. It'll be kind of exciting.
In the future, we'll talk about ozone, and we'll talk about other things, IV vitamin C and aromatherapy more, and lots to talk about.
Lots to talk about. Well, thank you again. And I'm sure our listeners are going to love it. And thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Pets, People, Life, and Longevity, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch every episode at exvadio.com/podcasts, the Apple Podcast app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Audible, and wherever you find podcasts.